I've been meaning to make this video for a very long time. Last year while I was working on this video, I started watching a little series called One Piece, and to be perfectly honest with you, I was not ready for the impact it would have on me. Now, almost a year later, I can say without a doubt that One Piece is my favorite thing of all time. So obviously I wanted to talk about it on this channel, but as a lot of you may know, One Piece is long. Very, very long. At the moment of recording this video, One Piece has over 1010 manga chapters and 959 anime episodes. And originally, I'm gonna say that a lot in this video, I wanted to make one big, all-encompassing kind of video that would break down why One Piece is so genius. But eventually I realized that this was a bit of a fool's errand. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of videos out there that have attempted to do what I just described. And while these videos are great, I don't think they'll ever be able to say all there is to be said about the series in a single video. But that's not really their fault. One Piece is simply just too massive and dense to try and dissect in just one video without forgetting something or scheming over important aspects of it. So instead, I decided that I will be breaking down this series piece by piece. One piece by... you know what, fuck it, let's move on. So after I decided I couldn't make a video talking about this series in general, I wanted to try and make a video focused on how most of Oda's characters have a surprising amount of layers to them. Layers that, unsurprisingly, a lot of people miss because they make the mistake of taking these characters at face value, and this is because Oda likes to make his characters deceptively simple so they're initially easy to understand. Like, yeah, Usopp is a liar, Nami's obsessed with money, Zoro is a meathead obsessed with fighting, Sanji is a gentleman cook obsessed with women, and perhaps the best example of all, Luffy is a cheerful kid who wants to become the Pirate King. But I realized that in order to appropriately convey my point to you, I'd have to really go into one of these characters instead of trying to talk about all of them at once. And at first I thought the best way to start this off would be with Luffy, but the problem with him is that Luffy is one of the most layered, well thought out, and tightly written characters I've ever seen in a piece of fiction. So trying to break him down would take a long time and an actual reread of the entire series if I actually wanted to do him justice. So I'll leave the Luffy video for another day. Instead, the first character we'll be taking a look at is Usopp, mostly because the way his development and progression is presented to us is slightly more obvious and less nuanced than most of the other Straw Hats. So to start with, what did we learn about Usopp in his introductory arc? That he's a liar, sure. That he's a bit of a coward, yes. That even though his dad left him, he doesn't hold any ill will towards him and even admires him. But there's another relevant character trait that I forgot to mention there, and it's that Usopp is weak. Compared to the monstrous strength of Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, Usopp is just a normal kid that wanted to be a pirate like his dad, but he wasn't really ready for what that would entail. We see this first at Arlong Park when Usopp is fighting Chu. While a lot of people tend to overlook this fight since the focus of the arc is on Nami, it is still a crucial moment in Usopp's character arc. At first, Usopp didn't want to fight. In fact, he had managed to fool Chu into thinking he had killed him, so Usopp could have just as easily left it at that. And it's here we see both aspects of the character at play. He's weak and a coward, but he's also kind and cares too much about his friends to just sit there and do nothing. His conscience wouldn't let him run away from this, because while Usopp is a good liar, he could not fool himself. Not for a lack of trying, however. He felt genuinely ashamed and pathetic, because not only was he betraying his own dream by running away the first time his words are actually put to the test, but he was also betraying the crew in a sense by deciding not to help and fight while everyone else was out there risking their lives. I'll say it again, Usopp is just a normal kid. He isn't particularly strong like these three, and he doesn't have an essential skill to offer the crew like Nami. He knows this and is very insecure about it, and it's this very aspect of him that's in full display here. By deciding to fight Chu, Usopp finally comes to terms with the life he's going to live from now on, with the risks and sacrifices that the life entails. Basically, he comes to terms with what it means to be a pirate. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Luffy spells it out right here. Being a pirate is not about being prepared to take the life of someone else, but being able of putting your own life on the line. Although that's just one part of it. Most pirate crews in this world could more aptly be described as an organized crime group, but a lot of them could also be described as families, with the Straw Hats clearly falling into this category. These are people that are willing to die for each other if need be, but this is the commitment that comes along with joining one of these crews. We see it time and time again, how they're all willing to throw themselves into the pits of hell for the sake of one crewmate. Usopp here was lacking that commitment, but he recognizes that, and this is how it ties back into the insecurities I mentioned. Usopp is a coward, but he doesn't want to be. That's why he decides to put his life on the line now, not just for the sake of his dream, but because in his own words, he wants to be able to smile and laugh like they do, and if he's not able to do this, then he doesn't have the right to sail on the same ship as them. Now, in case you're still lost as to what I'm trying to say, Usopp holds himself up to a high standard because he doesn't feel like he has a place in the crew unless he can perform at the same level as everyone else. He wants to be just as strong and useful as everyone else in the crew. The problem, however, is that it's already hard enough for Usopp to try and keep up with them, and things will only keep getting tougher, so he will eventually hit a wall that might just prove to be a little bit more than he could handle. Now, doing a big jump all the way to the end of Long Ring Longland, all the stuff I just mentioned starts to manifest here. The Straw Hats have been completely overwhelmed by Aokiji, and Usopp says this. This may seem like a small throwaway line, but taking into consideration what we learned about him at Arlong Park and the events that just transpired, this is when we start to see just how real Usopp's insecurities are. He had been managing for a while, but with how ambitious his captain's dream is, things will only keep getting harder. Enemies will only keep getting stronger from now on, and he's just not sure if he can keep up. But at least in his eyes, he still has one thing he's good at, or more adequately described, one responsibility that's unique to him, one thing he can offer the rest of the crew, and that is taking care of the Going Merry. When they arrive at Galila, Usopp gets jumped by some Frankie family thugs and loses the money they were gonna use to fix the Going Merry. This, paired up with how Usopp was feeling at the time, was a devastating blow for him. He was ashamed to even face the crew after this, so Usopp then goes to the Frankie family house in an attempt to get the money back, but he didn't stand a chance. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper then find Usopp bloodied and utterly defeated on the ground. And of course, they get pissed off at the Frankie family for this, so much so that they destroy the whole fucking building. And while it's easy to get hyped up and carried away at this moment, you gotta consider how Usopp feels about the situation. He lost the money to fix the Merry, got his ass beat twice, and then his friends had to come save him, all on top of how he was already feeling. Usopp's at the end of his rope here, and well, we all know what happens next. Luffy breaks the news to Usopp. They won't be able to fix the Merry even if they had the money. Every fear and insecurity that's been slowly brewing in Usopp ever since they left Zero Village finally comes out in this exchange. And I'm going to go into a bit of a tangent here, but something I really love about this whole ordeal is that a lot of other stories, when they try to make their main characters fight about something or have a disagreement, more often than not, their conflict usually comes about in a very forced way, like an incredibly stupid misunderstanding where characters suddenly stop acting like themselves. And all that just so that we can move the plot along and get to the forced conflict faster. But in the case of One Piece, these developments could be seen from a mile away. We knew about Usopp's insecurities and the standard he holds himself to, we knew how much damage the Merry was accumulating over their travels, and we also knew just how much Usopp cared for her. So Usopp finally snapping in this exchange is entirely understandable and expected. Both of them get caught up in the moment and say some stuff they would later come to regret. I'm about to point out the most obvious thing, but while Usopp does deeply care about the Merry, he's talking more about himself in this scene than he is the Merry. When Usopp asks Luffy if he's just gonna abandon the Merry here, it's really about him, and this is all very clear at the end when Usopp says everything on his mind. Now, to be honest with you, there's just no way words alone can do this fight justice. There are a lot of aspects at play here that make this fight even better than it should be. Aspects like how the rest of the crew are not neglected even though the focus is still on Luffy and Usopp. They all react in a way that is completely believable and in line with their characters. Like how Chopper's first instinct as a doctor is to help those in need and goes to treat Usopp, and how Sanji stops Chopper because he has a better understanding of concepts like honor and chivalry and knows exactly how ashamed Usopp is feeling right now. Also, while Luffy is the captain, Nami is always the one making sure the crew's antics don't get too far out of hand. Whether it be Zoro and Sanji fighting or Luffy and Usopp doing stupid things, she's always there to put a stop to it. But this situation has spiraled far beyond her control, so this frustration and the impact of seeing her newly acquired family slowly crumble, well, it's proving to be much more than she could handle. The fight concludes, Luffy realizes how hard it is to be the captain, and Usopp is now officially not a member of the crew anymore. But even after all this, when Robin eventually gets kidnapped, he still deeply cares about the crew and wants to go help them save Robin. But feeling ashamed of what he's done, he makes up the Sogeking persona so that he doesn't have to face them as Usopp. And I asked some of my friends if they know which moment in Enies Lobby was the climax of Usopp's character arc, and I got answers like when he yelled at Luffy to stand up or when the Going Merry died. But there was another moment that I think was much more relevant to his character arc. Some people may already know what I'm talking about, but at one point in the arc, Jabra tricked Usopp into thinking he wasn't gonna fight him and threw the key at Usopp. He believed this, and sure enough, when he went to pick it up, Jabra attacked him. Usopp tried to fight back, but he was simply outmatched and was about to get killed over his mistake. Luckily, however, Sanji came in the nick of time to save him. But this was another huge blow for Usopp because he wasn't strong enough again, he had to get saved again. So feeling useless and pathetic, Usopp immediately tries to apologize to Sanji for being so weak, but Sanji interrupts him and says this.
お前にできねえことは俺がやる。俺にできねえことをお前がやれ。よく考えろ。状況を読め。お前がいれば、ロビンちゃんは必ず救えるんだ。ウソップ！
俺がいれば、ロビンを救える。
And Sanji is speaking from personal experience here because back in this scene, Sanji heavily implies that in his fight against Khalifa, he wasn't trying to lose, but because of how he was raised, he physically cannot bring himself to kick a woman. And so Sanji leaves Khalifa in the hands of Nami because he understands that we all have things that we are and aren't good at. But Usopp was always comparing himself to the objective utility of a strong fighter, a doctor, or a navigator, and in the process losing sight of that which only he could do. I think that before this point, Usopp had identified his role as sniper of the Straw Hat Pirates, but it wasn't until this very moment when Usopp truly embraces it. So he accepts that while he'll never be as strong as others, he can still help the crew in ways they never could. For example, without Sanji telling this to Usopp and Usopp having this realization, there would have been no way to both stall Spandam long enough for Frankie to get there and get the keys to Robin in time. And at first I wasn't sure if I should talk about this scene because to me at least it felt much more like a Luffy moment than a Usopp moment. Now I'm not saying that it's a mutually exclusive thing, you can have a moment that highlights both characters, but here I feel like the spotlight is clearly on Luffy. And while what I'm about to say is obvious, the thing that keeps Luffy pushing through it all are his crewmates. He cares much more about them and their safety than his own. Usopp knows this about him, and we also know that Usopp still hasn't swallowed his pride yet, so that's why instead of outright telling him to just stand up, first he says he's here for Robin and not for him, then he uses a roundabout way of telling Luffy to stand up by trying to provoke Lucci to come after him and putting his own life at risk. This is of course exactly the type of push Luffy needed, so he gets up, we get one of the hypest moments in the series. The Mary saves them all and absolutely nothing important happens next. Nuh-uh, moving on. Okay, in all seriousness, there's just nothing too insightful I can say about this. It's abundantly clear how hard this hits Usopp. The Mary was more than just a ship he had to care for, he saw a part of himself in the Mary. She was the last thing to remember Kaya and his hometown by. But even more than that, the Mary was a part of the crew.
ごめんね。もっとみんなを遠くまで運んであげたかった。ごめんね。ずっと一緒に冒険したかった。
But unfortunately for you, I don't want to cry right now, so I'm just gonna move on. After this, Usopp finally apologizes and Luffy gives him a hand to get back on board. Or does he? But for real though, while this scene is good and all, I still think the most important lesson Usopp learned this arc was the one with Sanji. Although we don't really get to see how much it affects Usopp until another scene that I usually don't see people talking about. But before getting into that, I want to use this section of the video to clear up some misunderstandings that people have about Usopp, specifically post-time skip. And thankfully, a little someone has gathered a good bunch of them for me to clear up. Please welcome ProCD.
The time skip, I feel like, changed some characters for the worse for me. Making Usopp really ripped doesn't really work for me. Like, the whole point is that he's like kind of like this noodly Looney Tunes character just struggling to get by.
So about Usopp's redesign, I believe this is completely in character for him, and I would agree that this was a bad choice if this meant it made Usopp as strong as someone like Brook or Frankie, but it doesn't do that. The thing it does do for the character, however, is telling us how much he's grown and how much he cares about his captain and his dream. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I invite you to read chapter 596 where Usopp desperately wants to get stronger because he realizes how tough Luffy's path is going to be. And this is where we see how Sanji's speech at Enies Lobby helped Usopp find value in himself. This is no longer the Usopp that sees himself as a worthless crewmate, but as a valuable part of Luffy's crew with his own unique strength he can bring to the table. The Usopp from Water 7 would have never said something like this, but because it's been so long since Water 7, most people don't realize how important this scene is. Also, Usopp literally says, "I need to put on some muscle," so yeah, I'm guessing ProCD just skipped this chapter, but anyways, back to him.
The plants thing, I can completely take or leave. I think it's just kind of random.
Usopp's very much a schemer when it comes to his fights, so the flexibility of the pop greens just seems like the perfect weapon for him, since they're not particularly overpowered but can be used in smart ways. Although I will say that I'd like to see him use the dials a bit more. Anyways, back to him.
But the most damning thing for Usopp for me was Dressrosa. He basically abandons the little, what are they called? Tontatans, the little fairy kids. He like runs away and abandons them when they need his help. This is something that to me is completely unforgivable for Usopp's arc. Usopp's whole arc is that he's a coward and he's very legitimately scared, but he always like gets into the fight to help other people because it's right. It is the right thing to do, and he gets through it despite his fear and his weakness.
So first let me explain the Usopp fight archetype. Almost every single Usopp fight starts with him running away, then his conscience weighs down on him, and then he mans up and decides to fight despite of his fears. We see this all the time in his fights, and that's literally exactly what he does in this fight except for one detail, and before I go into that, let's hear this.
And in that moment, it just felt like, is this like fucking early Usopp from like the first arc? This sucks. I was legitimately pissed off. It was such a, I felt like a betrayal of the character, and it knocked him down permanently several notches for me. I feel like since then, he's never had to like really tackle that sort of fear. Such a waste of character development.
So okay, never tackle that kind of fear? This moment is even more impactful in that area because before, these were opponents that were clearly within his reach. Challenges for sure, but not completely beyond him. In here, he's completely outmatched and he fully realizes this. In his speech before he shoots Treble, he tells the Tontatas that if he dies here, they better build him a statue because he will offer his life to become their legendary hero. In this instance, he was quite literally ready to die. He says he would rather die fighting than running away. This is the exact opposite of a waste of character development. What are you talking about? Anyways, there's a metric fuck ton of stuff he gets wrong about the other Straw Hats in this video, but I won't go into that because this video is about our boy Usopp. Also, I just want to make it clear that this is not me saying that he can't enjoy some characters more than others. He's allowed to do that, but what frustrated me here was the complete misunderstanding of some of these characters. Yeah, anyways, go subscribe to ProCD, he's a very funny guy and he puts out good shit. Moving on now. This is a last minute addition to the video and I thought I'd throw this in here since this section is about clearing up misunderstandings. But anyways, somehow while editing I've come across an alarming amount of people that think Usopp regresses in his development after every fight. Because after winning he then goes back to being a coward, but this comes with the assumption that Usopp ever stopped being a coward. And that's just not it. Usopp is supposed to be the character that the reader can relate to because he's the most human out of everyone in the crew. He doesn't have any special skills or powers, and if you were in his shoes you probably would have ran away in every single one of his fights. But what makes Usopp appealing is that even though he's just as vulnerable as any one of us, even though he's just as scared as anyone else would be, he always finds a way to convince himself to fight, basically what I mentioned earlier with step 2. So again, what makes Usopp appealing is not that he's scared and weak like we would be, is that even though he's scared and weak, he still manages to muster up the courage to fight every single time, even when he's not sure that he can even win. Anyways, back to the video. So what I'm about to talk about here is something that applies to most One Piece characters, and that is how Oda thinks of every facet of his characters when writing them. And I mean, we know where every aspect of Usopp's personality comes from. We know why he's a bit of a clown and immature, it's because he used to hang out with a bunch of kids. That's also why he has such a good chemistry with Chopper and Luffy, who are also very immature in certain areas. We know why he's more of a coward than everyone else in the crew. Because unlike Luffy that dealt with pirates and bandits his whole life, Zoro who was a pirate hunter, Sanji who served in a restaurant where they had to constantly fight off pirates, and Nami's entire early life before meeting the crew was about gaining the trust of pirates and then stabbing them in the back, and this goes for the rest of the crew. But unlike everyone else, Usopp grew up in a little village where he and his friends would only play pirates and there was no real threat to them, so Usopp never had any real experiences with pirates or danger at all. I'm saying all this because when Oda writes a character, even if the purpose of the character is seemingly only for comedic relief, he asks himself, why does the character act that way? What are the implications of this character's behavior? How does it feel to be in their position? How does it feel to be this weak or useless amongst a group of extraordinary people? And a lesser writer would have completely butchered his character. I see a lot of manga writers that when trying to write a character, they end up with a single-purpose, one-dimensional, unrealistic caricature that maybe learns a lesson or two throughout the whole story, and they all have backstories that only serve as an excuse for their one-dimensional nature instead of actually fleshing out their character. Whereas One Piece has three-dimensional, multifaceted people because while One Piece characters may look like wacky cartoons, they are written in a tight, coherent, consistent, and thought-out way that makes them feel much more human than any other characters I've ever seen. What I also find intriguing is that for a lot of the characters in One Piece, a sizable amount of their depth lies within the subtext of their dialogue and actions. Specifically for characters like Brook and Sanji. I used Usopp as my first example because his is one of the very few cases where the story kinda just spells it out for us. Even if Luffy and Usopp didn't have this falling out, Usopp's character and his insecurities would have still been there, just not in plain sight anymore. We could have still inferred what was going on in Usopp's head just going off of the subtext of Arlong Park and such. So with Usopp's case, we didn't have to figure that out on our own. known, but with the other Straw Hats, most of their death will not be revealed in a single instance like right here. Of course, Usopp keeps developing, as I hope I've already made clear, and Robin is in a kind of similar spot as him, but for the rest I find that while they do have big scenes where we learn a lot about them, they're more scattered throughout the whole story, instead of having one big moment or arc where we learn about like 60% of their entire character. And this is not to say Robin or Usopp are more or less developed than the rest of the crew, it's just that Oda decided to approach their development in different ways. And of course there are a few exceptions to this, like Sora's moment at the end of Thriller Bark, where this single decision tells us a tremendous amount of information about who he is, but I digress. What I was trying to say here is that if you're trying to fully understand a certain character in this series, you should number 1 just generally pay more attention to what the character is both saying and doing, and 2, take some of their biggest moments or lines of dialogue and contrast them with each other. Take for example both of these scenes I mentioned earlier. In isolation they give us a lot of insight into the character, but it's not until you put them together that you start to get a clearer picture of who Usopp is and just how much he's grown. And I've been talking about Usopp for a while, but even now I don't think I've said all there is to be said about him. I didn't talk about his fight in Alabasta and how he wouldn't stand for his captain's dream being made fun of. I didn't talk about his fight with Perona and how great that was. But I think I've said enough, so let's ask the big question. What was the point of all this? Well, the point is that I love One Piece and I wanted to express my love for the series somehow. And it pains me that while One Piece is widely praised by most people, there's still aspects of the series that are completely misunderstood and unappreciated. For example, most people like Luffy, but because of his personality they think he's a much more simple character than he really is. Characters like Sanji and Brook are also often misunderstood and very underrated. Or to put it in other words, these characters have a lot of layers that go unnoticed by many readers. That's why this video has the title that it does. That's why I decided to start this series of videos. And while Usopp is a character that I believe was harder to misunderstand or just generally miss his layers, clearly some people still managed to do just that. And I don't blame anyone for missing the point of certain scenes or not remembering certain lines of dialogue. Sometimes you need a full understanding of what came before to truly appreciate some of these scenes. So that's why in this series of videos I'll try to do justice to some of the series' more generally underappreciated characters or arcs, who knows, I might do that. And while I may miss some stuff here and there because One Piece is massive and I can't reread the whole thing every time I do a character analysis, I'll still do my very best to try and explain the genius of this wonderful series. So, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit that fucking bell button piece of shit he pissed on my wife, and please drop a comment down below on why Gaimon could beat Goku. Anyways, until next time, peace.